WestJet Pilots and other podcast listeners, and welcome to this edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilots podcast. I'm your host today, Captain Desmond Jordan, and joined as always in the sound booth by Captain Chris Von Jones. And today, it's a little bit of a special event. We have the entire MEC Executive here with us today. Of course, Captain Bern Lewell, how are you today, sir?
Good, Des. How are you doing?
Excellent. Good. Also, Captain Chris Thal, how's it going, Chris?
Doing well, Des.
Good news, good. And today, for the first time participant, long-time listener, we have our Treasurer and Secretary, Captain Jason Roberts. Mr. Captain Roberts, how are you today?
Good, Des. Good to see you.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. So we've had the good fortune of having both Chris and Bernie here previously, but as mentioned before, Jason, this is your first time on the podcast, so why don't you just give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Des. Started in the Secretary-Treasurer role about a year ago, and before that, I helped out with the Grievance Committee for a couple of years. Been at WestJet for 11 years. Right now, captain based out of Calgary.
Grievance, I imagine, was probably a pretty busy time for you, and probably a good segue into the Secretary-Treasurer's role.
Yeah, it was a pretty steep learning curve, but thankfully, we've got a really strong grievance committee to support that.
Excellent. Well, it has most certainly been a year to remember. Some significant things have taken place over that time frame. I'm wondering, guys, if we just go around the table here, if you guys can think of some points that stand out as, key moments over this year. Bern, I'll start with you.
Sure. Okay. For me, I guess two big moments would be in early morning, May 19th, when we actually came to a tentative agreement. But then the second biggest point for me was October 28th. That was the last day that Swoop flew, and that was the day that the reintegration of those aircraft and those crews happened, and that was a momentous day, I think, for everyone, all the WestJet pilots, whether you were at Swoop or at WestJet.
I would agree with that. A lot of times, or many people, we think about, Swoop's dead, we've killed Swoop, but there's more to that. There's more depth to that. Swoop is gone, that is true. But the other side of that is that those Swoop pilots and those Swoop employees are now a part of WestJet, working under a WestJet contract with WestJet wages and WestJet working conditions. And that ultimately is what we're looking to do, was to advance the piloting profession in Canada. I think we'd all agree that we've done a good job with that aspect.
Certainly does. Yeah. The last thing we wanted, but we did have for the last 5 years, was a B scale. So we got rid of the B scale, and that was a huge occasion for all of us, I think.
Absolutely. Chris, what would you think would be your standout moment?
Des, I'm not going to say a specific date, I don't think. I'm kind of going to lean on pilot unity a little bit here, whether it's, some of the family awareness events, which I'm sure we can talk about later. But, we've seen volunteerism in every single committee skyrocket through the whole process. And, I mean, even as recently as our merger committee, we had a lot of guys and girls putting their hands up to join, a committee that is very controversial, that typically people would shy away from. And, we just finished like a week worth of interviews for people that want to be on the merger committee, right? And it's not just the merger committee, it's been every committee, SPSC, whatever we need, right? So, I mean, the pilot volunteerism, the engagement, even just wearing lanyards, that's been a struggle for years around here. Is, well, you're wearing an ALPA lanyard. Look at the training folks. All of our training guys, most of our training guys now are wearing the ALPA training lanyard. We've come a long way, and I think this year is monumental as a year for the shift in mentality of our pilots does.
Yeah, absolute definite show of unity there. It's like you said, it's great. Like I remember in the earlier days, volunteerism or getting volunteers it wasn't the easiest thing.
Right.
People weren't really sure about the union. They weren't really sure where they fit in, if there were things to do. But like you said now, a lot more people have put their hands up, and that is a great thing to see. It really speaks to the way that this group has unified and come together. Yeah, that's a great thing. Jason, is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, I was thinking about that first picketing event at the end of March, and everybody threw that together just last minute. I think there was 2 weeks notice, and SBSC pulled it off, and it was incredible. And I remember sitting in the front row, and I turned around, and it was incredible to see hundreds of pilots standing behind us, literally and figuratively, from across North America. So that ALPA unity and that show that, so many pilots represented by ALPA are here to help us, that was a big moment for me.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that too. I can actually remember for myself at that picketing event also, looking at the number of pilots that were there and actually thinking to myself, I've always been relatively happy or enjoyed being a pilot, but at that moment I actually felt pride about being a part of ALPA and being a part of being a WestJet pilot, and that was significant for me also. For myself, something that sticks out was actually one of the pilot unity events. It was the one in Toronto. We were at a Blue Jays game. We had a beautiful suite, and there were pilots and their kids and other family members. And the roof was open. It was a beautiful sunny day. And I remember looking around and just looking at all the pilots and their families there, just being people, just enjoying being out on a nice day with their families, enjoying something social. And I was like, you know what? This is why I got into aviation. This is the type of life that I wanted to live. And it was very interesting to see all those people just enjoying themselves as themselves. So that stands out for me as a real moment where I was like, yeah, we're doing something positive here and we're moving things in the right direction.
It's a good one, Des. I'll comment on one of my favorites, and it was certainly one of our smaller ones. I know we did the Blue Jays, we did some NHL games, but being from Winnipeg, we had a Manitoba Moose game, which is our junior team, right? So it's not a huge event, but the turnout was awesome, as it usually is in Winnipeg, and it was really neat seeing all the kids, because that's essentially what these junior games are. A bunch of kids, they can run up and down the aisles and not get in trouble. But we had this room, and the kids, none of them essentially had ever met each other, and they were best friends for 4 hours running around, and that event was, my boys always bring it up that, we need to go with all those pilot kids again. And that was, so when I seen that, it always is like, wow, it's not about the boys or the girls hanging out with each other, the brothers and sisters, the unions. It is the families, right? And so Heather Charlin's knocked it out of the park this year.
Yeah, it's did a great job. Job. Yeah, it brought back to me the idea that, I love flying airplanes, aviation's cool, but, people want to be people and people want to live their lives. And it was just really interesting to see people enjoying their lives and just being regular people doing their thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think we did that all across the country, right? We had a Canucks game, we had Edmonton Oilers, the Calgary Flames, and we had pub nights right across the country as well, right? And that was really, like Chris said, Heather really kind of batted that one out of the park, right? That really contributed to the unity of this pilot group, and it was something that we haven't seen in years, and it was so good to see. And it's something that we want to keep seeing going forward. So I think Jason, we're going to try to keep that going over the next couple of years, eh?
Yes, no, that is the plan for sure. That was what I noticed. Seeing all the families get together, it's really important. So we're definitely setting aside a significant amount to keep that going.
Good stuff. So as we mentioned before, it has been a significant year in the history of WestJet ALPA, and quite a few things have happened there. I was wondering, Bern, could you just give us a high-level overview of the things that have gone on this year?
So to that, Des, I guess we can start back in November of 2022. We had a bit of a reorganization of the MEC.
Yeah, that was a bit of it was a significant change. It changed kind of the direction in which we were going. Chris, can you talk to some of the changes that were made there?
Sure does. I think it was more of a style change,
Yeah, okay.
and there's personality changes as well that came with it. So last year on December 14th, I remember we're at some really crummy recording studio northeast end of Calgary, and we all walked in, and we had planned to make these videos because we want to do things a little bit differently, and we wanted to go down the social media and more public route of building unity, right? So, I think that's something that had never really been tried before, even on the Canadian landscape as far as negotiations go. And there we were making, we'll call it the hangar video, in this tiny little studio with a green screen behind us, and we all had no idea how or where that was going to go. But I think as we progressed, and we've certainly, improved over the last 12 months, and we've got a lot of talent. We've discovered talent with an organization that we've been able to use. So have we changed, and has the direction changed a little bit? At that point, I think it was a shift for sure, and I'd like to say it produced.
All right. The real question is, how did you get in the hangar?
Well, Des, that's going to have to say secret.
Tell.
Yeah, well, Bernie's the one that got that phone call from the company asking how, so that's probably his story to tell, but pretty cool stuff that we were able to pull off.
Right on. Can you continue with that overview there, Bern?
Well, let me just back up there a bit. With that green screen video, both Chris and I were we're somewhat reluctant participants, I think, on that. We really
that's fair.
weren't sure if we could do that as an in-house project. And to our delight, I guess, CVJ and the SPSC team did such a fantastic job with it that they became basically our videographers and podcast hosts ever since then.
So, of course, the SPSC team and the video team did a great job with all of that. Where does that leave us in the timeline, Bern?
Yeah, so we continued on with negotiations, and then early February we reached an impasse with the company. So on February 10th, we filed for conciliation, if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember. So, and when we filed for conciliation, that is also a significant change. It changes some things, specifically financially. From an ALPA perspective, what happens for our group when we file for conciliation? Jason?
Yeah, so once we filed for conciliation, ALPA allows us to access what's called the Major Contingency Fund. So they give us a grant, basically, up to a certain dollar value to help us get through the end of negotiations.
Right, Jason. So, especially having that extra cash going through and starting into conciliation, not only on the SPSC side, the moving and shaking side, I mean, certainly is funding our flight release and any other volunteer roles that we need to start supplementing some income for time to dedicate to the union to get us through negotiations. That MCF's huge, right? I mean, what was the total value we got?
Yeah, so ALPA approved us. It's based on the size of your airline. So they approved us up to $2 million that we had access to.
$2 million came out of essentially nowhere from ALPA National to support us to get through, right? And I mean, here we are with a bag of popcorn watching Air Canada more or less go through the same thing right now, right? So very cute, very cool, huge support from ALPA. And I mean, I think everybody in this room on this podcast today can agree that that money sure helped our position.
Absolutely a benefit for being a part of a large pilots union.
Now, I think it should be noted, we never spent the $2 million, but it was available to us. For contrast, Air Canada has up to $5 million to support them in their contract negotiations.
That's big money.
It's
Membership
big.
has privileges.
World class.
Speaking of world class, let's talk about the commitment from the committees and the LEC and all the reps going into endgame negotiations.
Right, Des? I mean, we spent quite some time up in Markham, Ontario with our local executive reps, and I tell you, I mean, they got us through this contract. They really pushed and they held the line, and they listened to the members, whether it's been answering darts or just spending time at the coffee chats. Those were the needle movers, and our reps really held our negotiations team to account, us as the MEC. I mean, we can sit here on the podcast and say, oh, we're the MEC, let's talk about everything going on in the union, but let's clarify that the reps are the ones that are directing this ship, and it's coming from the members. So the reps were a huge part of us getting our contract so that Air Canada can now leverage off and get their world-class contract.
Give us some insight into what it was like in the room behind the lines.
It was terrible, Des. Like, it was awful. I mean, hey, one perk, and I'm so glad, like, we had people that were just, like, constantly on, like, restock mode because we're essentially in a basement with no windows, and, you're always, you're worried about your next meal, and there's food, and it's like, we had all this support with, hey, we had Jason Roberts, pretty thick guy. This guy owns a gym. He's going to get us fruits and vegetables instead of, the burgers and the fries that we normally are just easy enough to order. So you're worried about like your intake. And then here you are at, what time it is because there's no light and it's 3 or 4 in the morning and you're still talking about, passes about deadheading, commuting or association flight relief. Like, who knows, right? It was crazy. It was absolute war.
Yeah, and it was definitely all hands on deck. Everybody was in, committed 120% to it. It was great.
And you throw into, we had interviews going on all the time,
Right.
and
Media.
The media, and we had the reps. We had to keep them informed with what was going on, and ensure that the negotiators as well were kind of going on a route that would be acceptable to the LECs. And then you got the company coming in every couple hours. There are a lot of, I won't say sleepless nights, but you and I went on very little sleep, I think, Chris.
Very little sleep, Bernie, would be accurate. Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah,
and that was us, but I mean, our negotiating team was at the table consistently. And I mean, I think we did a good job. They blew us out of the water. They were probably 200% more committed than we were of sitting at
Oh,
that
yeah.
table and working on that language after your eyes go cross-eyed and all the words start blurring on the projector. Like it's not a healthy feeling at all.
What was good about that team, though, is that they lived it and they enjoyed it. You know,
They did.
as horrible as that sounds, they actually enjoyed it and they relished the challenge. Eh?
And at one point, Bertie, and it was kind of fun. They came to you and they said, "Hey, we know the reps have a room with windows in it upstairs, and we'd like to have that room." Remember that?
Yeah, no, I do.
And we basically just quashed them and said, "No, you can stay in the basement and keep working."
yeah.
But they were so dedicated, we didn't want to change anything because they were on a roll. They were on the rails. We were getting passes back and forth. We were accomplishing a lot of items, right? So it was that was a pretty funny moment.
Yeah, and that week is when the majority of the actual passes were accepted by either the company or us, I think.
Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah, in
well,
the bunker.
I will tell you, as somebody who is and was flying the line, all that work did not go unnoticed. There's not a day that goes by when I don't run into somebody who on the way to the airplane or on a jetway who says, "Hey, you know what? Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate the work that you've done. You guys did a good job." So,
Well, and that is, I think, something that we've heard time and time again, Des, right? The guys are actually happy to have money in their accounts, right? In their checking account or their savings account, which we haven't had. I've been here 19 years, never had that.
Brennan, you're absolutely right when you talk about the compensation. It's interesting because this agreement actually fundamentally changed the way pilots at WestJet were compensated. Would you guys agree with that?
Oh yeah, I can tell you, Mrs. Thalsher likes the new paychecks, right? Like, I mean, it's not only the raise that we got, but it's the way we're paid, and it's made a big difference on how we can all go about living our lives and what we've kind of aspired to achieve working at an airline as an airline pilot.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd like to add to that is the commitment from the company that a pension will be coming our way. So we're well into the research phase of that, and hopefully in the new year we'll have something for our pilot group.
Very good to know. Okay, so we've touched on the idea of the build-up to negotiations. We've touched on negotiations. We finally got our contract, and now it's implementation time. What can we say about that?
Yeah, it's been 6 months of implementation, different timelines for different areas of the scheduling contract. But I would like to shout out to John Janicki and Mike Matika and the scheduling committee. They've done just a fantastic job of working with the company and ensuring that implementation has been really fairly smooth and, from our point of view, seamless.
And I guess a shout out to the company or to our team in that, we've communicated fairly well the different levels and times at which different things are being implemented. So is that something that you guys were able to work out, that the company is communicating it through some of their communications as well as us through ours?
Des, I think there's an openness to discuss when we come to an issue with the company. So we spent some extra time, as some of you noticed, is after we got the contract, we almost had 30 days where we went through line by line with the company once more, every line to understand what it's all going to mean. Because we didn't necessarily, or the company was fearful, I'll say, of going through another, Grieve-a-Lanch or I Love to Grieve month with us saying, hey, that's not what the contract says. So we spent the time, we have a mutual understanding, and we moved on. And I think that when these issues do arise now that, yeah, we're still filing grievances, we're still holding them accountable to the contract 100%. But it's a lot easier to have a conversation of, well, what needs to be fixed? How can we fix it? That have a conversation with your manager, whether it's pilot to pilot or union to pilot, actually has some weight, and there's some decisions that are able to be made by management now.
Okay, so that speaks probably to the maturation of our union and somewhat a maturation within the management group. Still,
It does, yeah.
Still a ways to go, but we're moving in the correct direction.
Yep.
Fair enough to say?
Yeah, that's fair. Absolutely.
I think one of the positives of CA2 was that there is a fundamental change in how the company views the union. So they do want to work with us as opposed to what they did for the previous 4 or 5 years.
And another example of the company's growing respect for the union would be the fact that this was the first year that they attended the CASC meeting, or the Central Air Safety Committee meetings down in Chicago. Is that correct?
Yeah, Des, I think that was great how the company actually came down to the ASF, the Air Safety Forum in Chicago, and participated in the symposium down there. I think it was really important that it showed that the company is starting to view ALPA in a different light, as a resource as opposed to a hindrance, perhaps is a word we could use.
Good. So we're kind of coming to a mutual understanding that we can contribute to things that benefit them as well. It's not just a take relationship here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So continuing through with the progression of our timeline, we've gone through our build-up, we've gone through the contract, we've gone through implementation. That brings us about up to present day. Well, one of the big issues that's on the minds of the pilots right now is the merger situation that we find ourselves in. And with regards to that, one of the things that we've set up, or that will be set up, is the $50 per paycheck assessment. Jason, can you talk to us a bit about why that is, how that's set up, and what the reasons for having that set up are?
So we have to use outside funds, which that's where the assessment comes in, the $50 every 2 weeks. That'll allow us to build up a merger fund account so that we're ready to protect our pilots' seniority rights.
Okay, so this fund is going to be used for legal fees to ensure that during the merger process and any legal proceedings that take place, our pilots are left in the best possible position. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
you got it, Des, exactly. The other thing that we want to have the money for is if there's any disputes at the end of the integration of the seniority list.
Okay, so speaking of the merger, where are we in this process now? Bernie?
So we're recording this on December 7th, and we anticipate either tomorrow or the next day we should be filing the application with the CRB for the sale of business. And that will really, hopefully, start the timelines going forward. Ideally, we're going to, the merger committees will be getting together in the new year, and they'll be starting the talks with the idea that we'll have a seniority list to the company sometime October, November, December of next year.
Okay. So then is it our intent to make this a longer process, to have this drawn out, to go through court proceedings? How would we like to see this resolved?
You know, Des, I'll grab that one. I think that the WestJet Pilots, or certainly MEC, wants to see this merger done as soon as possible, right? The sooner we can get through this and start building unity for CA3 and, you know, take their core 18 airplanes that they're flying, right, Bern?
18 planes, is it?
18 airplanes, yeah.
Or 21, I'm not sure.
Or 42 airplanes where they're flying. Hey, I'm not sure either. But, you know, we want those 18 tails absorbed back into WestJet so that we can grow our fleet and have those pilots. And, you know, I'm looking forward to the day flying with the Sunwing guys. I got no issues with it. I think it's awesome that we're able to grow this company quickly. And I won't say this very often, but I'll say this now. The integration of Swoop was, as WestJet standards, disclaimer, WestJet standards, very smooth. It went off without a hitch, and I would love to see Sunwing have the same sort of transition in a mainline WestJet. Let's have it smooth. Let's get along with these guys, and we're going to move on. We're going to grow this airline, and we're going to grow our careers, essentially.
Yeah, and honestly, Chris, I think, like you said, the Swoop integration went really well. A year ahead of schedule. You and I heard no negative comments, really, from the Swoop pilots. I think they were actually happy to come over to WestJet and make a WestJet salary with a WestJet schedule.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, if Sunwing can at least see that externally and know that we're able to pull that off again once more with them, I think that's positive for their group as well.
And like you said, the quicker we can do this, the quicker we can, number one, the company can recognize the efficiencies, and we can build the unity for CA3.
Yeah. And get the upgrades, right? I mean, let's talk about that. There's lots of upgrades. There's lots of positions that could be coming available through that. So, I mean, our RFOs who have been sitting here waiting, you look at, we're recording this in Vancouver. So I think of the Vancouver FOs who are sitting here for 12 years waiting for an upgrade. I mean, I would love to see those upgrades, you know, especially somewhere like Vancouver.
It's important for those guys that have been sitting in the right seat for 10, 11, 12 years. We need to get those guys upgraded.
Yeah, we need to advance this company along.
Yeah, and there are some significant growth plans. We hope that the company can monetize over the next couple of years. Right?
Well, they don't have much choice, Bernie, honestly, with all the competition. They have to grow this airline. They have to grow it quickly, and they need the pilots to do it.
Okay, so Bernie, as our chair, I'm going to throw this question to you. What do you see for our group over the next year? Where do you see us going over the next year?
I think there's a lot of potential for this airline, Des. You know, number one, we're going to be really working on this merger and hopefully getting that finalized. But there's a lot of growth. It looks like Toronto is going to start flying a little bit more out east as well as back to Europe, which is really good for our crews out there. And I anticipate there's going to be growth all across the network, and so that's something I'm looking forward to myself.
And Chris, any follow-up on that?
Yeah, no, I think Bernie's pointed out, it could be a good news story next year with some of the growth with the aircraft orders and Alexis's book of orders that he speaks of. Certainly within the union, I think that we're focusing on growing the committees. We're focusing on growing the unity within the pilot group. But moreover, we're still implementing this contract, right? We're still trying to make those incremental gains that we weren't able to achieve during contract negotiation. And so I have all my committees focused on any of those opportunities, or if there is a chance where an issue comes up and we can resolve it with that incremental gain. It's like the game of crib, Des. You can count your hand at the end of the day, which is our negotiation cycle, but it's all about pegging those points in between. And I think that when the company has these problems that they need solved, we have to be willing to solve them, but we have to make the gain for it. And so there's certainly a particular focus on that as we go through this mid-contract cycle.
Okay, so the WestJet Pilots also need to remember that this is their contract, and it is their responsibility to fly that contract. If there are issues with it, make sure you grieve it and hold the company to account to uphold their end of the bargain.
Yeah, it's really easy, Des, to get your paycheck, look at it and say, oh, good enough, I'm good to go. But we need to be making sure we're checking, that our sick days are being paid and accounted for, that our personal days are being paid and getting accounted for, that we're getting our special days off. All these perks that are either lifestyle or pay, don't just fluff it off. Don't just log in your bank account and say, hey, thank goodness they paid me this week. We need you looking at the pay. We need you to monitor it. We need you to audit the company because we've experienced so many errors over the last, let's just say 5-10 years within payroll. So that's the first place to be looking. And then any sort of scheduling, like Bernie said, John Janicki's been an absolute rock star with his committee. They're always available, whether it's a dart, they're knocking those darts out of the park, or, John tends to be on every chat imaginable, essentially, whether it's reserve or an all base. He's there to answer the questions. So reach out, get the answer before you say yes or no to the company from the committee. And then we'll have that discussion. If we need to afterwards, we'll grieve it.
So remember, guys, you are the eyes and the ears of the association. What you see, what you hear, things that are going correctly or otherwise, it's up to you to bring it to the association so they can be dealt with appropriately. Well, everybody, it was another good and informative podcast. Again, a special thank you to the entire MEC Executive for joining us today. That's not an occasion that we get all the time. Just want to remind everybody it's the Christmas season. Take the time to enjoy your family and your time off. And from our MEC, I'd like to wish you all a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year. Please enjoy the holidays safely and enjoy it festively.
A world-class Merry Christmas to every pilot from Chris Thal.
And a big thanks to all of our committees, all our pilots for such a huge amount of support this year. We really appreciate it. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas.
Thanks again to everybody for coming out. Remember, read your communications, wear your lanyards, and most importantly, stay safe. Thanks again for joining us on this edition of PIREP, the WestJet Pilots Podcast. Merry Christmas.